This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patient.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Simulation Nation. Today, we are going to be talking about 3 essentials for human simulation.
Yeah, we gotta get used to that.
I know, I keep wanting to say standardized patient programs. But basically, I talk about this all the time. I feel like this is like my go-to webinar topic. This is one of those things that I discuss all the time. But what are the 3 things in terms of including live people in simulation? Where does it all boil down to? This is not going to go through all of the ASPE standards best practice. If you are utilizing live people inside of simulation, make sure you know what ASPE standards best practice are and incorporate them. But this is kind of the mechanisms in terms of what I think it all boils down to when you're looking at the factor of having live people in simulation.
I would also encourage you to look at the accreditation standards for human simulation. There's not a whole lot different in there, but they're a little bit, they've been updated in the last year or sent out in the last year, so it will help to inform you a bit.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with the number 1 essential. And these aren't necessarily in order. I wouldn't say that like number 1's the most important. I would just say
it's like a 3-legged stool.
Yeah.
They're all important.
Yeah. You need all of them, and they're all like equal.
And if one's off kilter, it's going to throw things off balance.
Exactly. Because it's all an even balance here. But the first thing that I like to talk about is standardization. And we talk a lot about standardization from a simulation perspective of saying like, oh, we don't want, the simulation to be significantly harder for one group and easier for another group. But we boil it down for the standardized patient because if you have a live person in that simulation, you're open up to a whole new level of...
Well, they're humans.
Exactly. And they have minds of their own. So
they're not
they
robots. Get tired and, there's a lot that goes on in a human's life, right?
Yes.
I mean, I will say the robots do go offline or break down.
True.
So
that's true.
That
not
could happen too.
Either.
But
exactly.
We're talking about human simulation today.
Yeah. So with a standardized patient, I'm going to just refer to as standardized patient, but just know that can include faculty members, that can include, senior level students coming back, all the different things. But I'm going to just refer to as standardized patient. With a standardized patient, you have 2 different forms of standardization that you're teaching them. One is individual standardization and one is team standardization. So with the individual standardization, the part that is the most important is that they cannot make the simulation more challenging if the students are doing well, hitting the objectives, and moving forward. They can't now add in a new challenge. They can't bring up something that they haven't been doing in the other simulations just to add something in. They also cannot make it easier when students are struggling. And I find that that's the more common one that happens, is that if they see a group coming in that's not prepared, that doesn't really feel confident, they'll start to clue them on what needs to happen next or what they need to be doing to try to help them along in the scenario. The biggest thing is, as a standardized patient, I have to remain objective in the scenario that's happening. So I can't start to say, oh, well, the last group took my blood pressure before they gave me that medicine, or the last time they stood me up before they were doing, I can't start to then give them hints of what they're supposed to do. I need to remain objective as the patient. Whatever happens in terms of like, let's say they give me the medication and then my blood pressure bottoms out or whatever it is, my only job is to react to what happens and what is coming through that scenario. So that's something
based off of the character description that has been written.
Yes, and based off of what the training has been and what I'm aware of, right? But my goal is to not get these students through simulation. My goal is to react and respond as the character from what's going on in the scenario. So practicing some of those pieces. The other component of individual standardization is that if it is 8 a.m. and I just had my coffee and I am awake and ready to go for the day, I have to have the same level of energy then that I do at 5 o'clock. But basically, I can't change my level of energy, complexity, the things that I'm asking based off of how many simulations I've done for the day or just my familiarity with the case. I remember one that I did was very early on. They told me that I had fibroids. And I remember the first time that they came in and told me that, I didn't know what that meant. So I asked, like, what are they? And so then they had to explain to me exactly what it was and that they were non-cancerous and all of these different pieces to it. Well, by the time you do that sim 6 times, you really don't want to ask what fibroids are.
You know exactly what fibroids are.
Because you know what they are. They've told you 15 times now, and you really don't want to hear it again.
Right.
But because as the character, and the first time I heard it, I didn't know what that was. So I had to ask it every single time that they would tell me and not offer an explanation. It was great when they did offer an explanation. I wouldn't have to go into it. But it's like Groundhog Day. You have to keep going back to exactly where you were. You can't be more comfortable with the role or with the education. You have to ask the same questions. So it's the same thing for a pediatric parent. If they're giving you information on the patient's condition or, new progresses or things like that, you have to react the same energy-wise of concern, of care, of worry the first time when they told you. You can't start to, again, let it taper off or let it, again, you're kind of more numb to it. So you have to treat it, again, like Groundhog Day, that every time you're starting again, you're remembering what questions you were asking, you are remembering like what you didn't know the first time you were hearing it, and then reacting and responding the same way.
Yeah. We intentionally didn't put that information in for new diagnosis because we wanted the SPs to think about what questions they would ask in the simulation, and then they had to repeat that every single time.
Yeah.
So,
and it does, like,
intentional.
I will say, too, as the SP, you are kind of like, I don't want to just do it again. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to do the same thing again.
Please don't make me ask that same question.
In purposes of standardization, you have to be. Thinking about pain. Again, this is another big one. Reacting to pain. If you are 8 out of 10 pain at the beginning of the scenario because you haven't gotten your pain medication yet, that is a high level of energy. And it depends on how long you're going to ask that patient to perform that high level of pain. But if you want them to be in an 8 out of 10 pain for 15 minutes at the beginning of the scenario, and they're doing it for 8 hours, you've got to really consider how high can they maintain 15 minutes of an 8 out of 10 pain. And you may have to negotiate a bit in terms of how they're demonstrating it. Maybe it does go down to a 6 rather than an 8 or something like that. But there are these different considerations for what can the SP actively do? Some of that is up to your SP, that they have to perform in a certain way, but some of it is going back and renegotiating the scenario for what is actually attainable from a standardization perspective.
Well, and it's also the fact that what we did was we built in breaks.
Yeah.
So think about if they are having, think of psychotic break or something like that, where it's super high level, super high stress. What we actually did was, for our psychotic breaks, is we had a patient and a family member, but we actually scheduled 4 SPs for that simulation so that they swapped in and out to take breaks, because it's hard to maintain that level.
And everyone was fighting to do psychotic. Everyone wanted to do psychotic breaks.
I mean,
so that wasn't
not everyone,
but
the ones that really like the challenge.
Mostly everyone.
It did end up being that way. But so do understand that, that when she mentions 8 hours, that's 8 hours with breaks. The other piece is that you also have to factor in that maybe the students aren't going to figure out how to program the PCA pump in 15 minutes. So it may be even longer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So again, just think about the fact that you're counting on those students to get in there and intervene quickly.
Yeah.
But it may take a little bit longer because they're not skilled. So again, just be considering all of those pieces about what level of pain you're asking.
Well, and think about like maternity, right? If you're delivering for a full 60-minute sim, that's a high energy scenario, right? And so just factoring in what are going to be your higher scenario ones or high level energy ones. And then how does that play into standardization? And some of that, again, goes back to training your SP, but some of it is also considering your simulation that you do. You then have team standardization. So team standardization is basically any person who is going to be playing the same role. So we're like, if I have 3 people and they are all playing Sarah Smith and I need them all to be the same level, I can't have SP number 1 get super angry when they find out that they're not being discharged. And then I can't have SP 2 react sad when they're going to be discharged. And I can't have SP 3 act nonchalant when they find out they're not going to be discharged. I need all of them to be reacting and responding at the same level. So a way that you can achieve team standardization is 1, through your dress rehearsals or your pilot program. So basically being able to go through and run through the scenario before it happens is going to be your number 1 in terms of being able to get it so that they are starting to all hear the same information. Because what I always worry about is if I give them a character description or the simulation, everyone can read things and interpret things differently. And again, your character descriptions are only going to ever have so much information. I cannot possibly make them 35 pages and say you need to know all of this information.
No.
So making it so that you're keeping it where, again, it's high level and it's the information they need to know, but I can't just keep adding to it. So having them all come in for a dress rehearsal at the same time gets me to have all of them and they're all hearing the same thing. So if someone asks a question about, let's say grandma being at home, right? I can respond the way that I want, this is your relationship with grandma and this is how you feel about it and this is how the interactions are going to go. We can have that conversation where everyone's there. And then the next part is I would all have them practice with each other there. So let's say I have the 3 patients. I would take my first standardized patient and we would start the scenario. The other 2 are watching in the control room. So I come in and I would be the nurse and we would start going through the first 5 minutes of the scenario. And I would then stop them and give them notes. So basically, let's say it's a depression scenario. I need you to be more inward. I need you to take more breaths. I need you to take longer to respond, whatever it may be. Well, the other 2 standardized patients are hearing the feedback that I'm giving to this patient. So then we swap out and I'll bring in standardized patient number 2. Standardized patient number 1 will go back in the control room and they'll watch the rest of the scenario. We'll pick up from where we left off. Like, okay, we're going to pick up where talking about your mom. We do another 5 minutes. I give that standardized patient feedback, and then we bring in the last one, and we do it as a round robin. So they were all seeing each other and learning from them, but they were also hearing my notes. So I would always tell them, like, whoever's the first standardized patient is probably going to get more notes than the last one, because the last one would have already seen all of the other people and hopefully implementing all of the notes that I've already given them. So by the time they're all acclimated and ready to go. The next part is I would have them come in and watch each other at different times. So they would come in and observe each other's scenarios, maybe once or twice just in the beginning part so that they could understand how other people were playing the scenario all the way through. That was a way of, again, making it so that they understood that the goal of this was that they were regulated. That the goal wasn't to be the best performer. The goal wasn't to outshine everybody else. The goal wasn't to be the angriest or the most upset or the funniest. The goal was that you were trying to regulate yourself with these other people so that we had consistent performances and standardization across the board. Yeah. And that was what the goal was.
And that's what I would say, like when you have theater students, you have to teach them that they're not playing to the audience, yep. Right? They're not going to bow at the end of this. They are really meant to be uniform to the other to the other groups.
Yeah. And what I would always tell them, especially with theater people, is it's like the best compliment I can give you is that I believed you were the patient. Not that I laughed, not that I had an emotional response, but I believe that you are the actual patient. And that's the part with simulation, that there is a mindset switch with that in terms of who they're performing for. Now, again, you're going to have people who are going to be more the hams and the ones who want to, things like that. As long as it's in the character and we're standardized, that's okay. Right.
And you're going to cast those individuals for those roles, right? The ones that
make
that
sense.
do.
Yes, exactly.
But I think the really, important piece of this, as you said, is it goes back to the believability of the patient, which is actually the full definition, right? That's been given to us for years and years, that it's so believable that even a trained clinician could not differentiate. And so that is the biggest compliment, and that's what you really need to hone in on and have them focus on, as far as the believability of the character.
Yeah. So that was my whole goal in terms of looking at the standardization of it, is I'm always trying to kind of like dial and play around with to get it so that we are at that right consistency where, again, everyone's at that same level. And so, because again, at the end of the day, the people who are benefiting from these scenarios, the students who are going through them, I don't want them to have different experiences. I don't want them to walk away talking to a classmate and being like, what was your Mildred like? Mine wasn't like that at all, right? Like, I want them to be like, oh no, did we have the same person, right? That's how I would have felt accomplished, was if they couldn't tell if they had the same person or not, or like physical features was the only way that they could tell that they had a different person. That would be my goal, is being able to say that.
And I will also say that, again, the way that we did it was we had students enrolled in courses at the university, and there have been simulations that I had students perform, and at the end of the simulation realized that the performer was the roommate of one of the nursing students, and they didn't know that they were going to interact with each other. There wasn't pre-planned, but that character was so believable as the patient that it didn't feel as though they knew each other or there had been any
Yeah, there's
any
no wink,
relationship
no
prior.
nod,
Yeah,
no
there was nothing. And
Yep,
that to
stays
me
the
was
same.
a
Yep.
huge, like, that really led to the success of our program, but it was really to the SP to maintain that patient role and in that mindset.
Yeah.
Because it could have gone a different way.
So our next essential is talking about feedback training. So basically, anytime you're going to include a live person in the simulation, you want to include some sort of feedback. In the debriefing process, it's not the debriefing process. That's what we make sure that they know, is that your feedback is not the entire debriefing process. It's a part of the debriefing process, and you do not run the debriefing session. But you need to provide training. And I think that is something that people often overlook, where they're kind of like, yeah, just give them feedback. And then they let them go. And kind of just wait to see what's going to happen. And again, this is something where it is so dependent on the personality of the SPs. Sometimes they are just like, I don't want to say anything mean ever. And sometimes they're like, I'm going to tell you every single thing I can possibly think of what you did wrong, right? And so it's the balance between the two, where we want there to be a constructive feedback process because they are representing the patient, right? And I think that is the important part, is that they are kind of the eyes and ears of the patient, and they're the only person who can speak to that inside of the scenario or inside of the simulation. But it's within bounds, and we need to make sure that they understand what the boundaries are for their feedback.
We are not attempting to discourage people from going into healthcare. We're trying to help them be better.
We're not attacking people from the top down, nor are we telling them that they did everything great and that they were fabulous and that they don't need to change a thing.
And I will say the caveat to this is, even if you're doing role play with other students or including faculty members, they should be learning all of this just the same as someone who is a neighbor or an untrained professional, right? They don't just assume that just because they are a clinical expert that they are going to be good at standardization and feedback, right?
Yeah.
Have them understand the importance, essentials of that. Have them read the ASPE standards best practice, but just make sure that you're not just going, you got it, you good, you know.
Just give them some feedback, just a little feedback, you know, and then seeing what happens. And I think that that's the part that can also go really poorly. Like in terms of a scenario, I'm really not as concerned as a simulation as I am about a feedback, because the students that are in that scenario that are going to receive that feedback, they're so vulnerable. Like they're in the most vulnerable state of like, I just tried my hardest. I just did everything I thought I could do. I studied, I prepared. And then now they're standing in front of you and you can cut them down so quick, and you want to be careful with it.
But I will say to that piece of that is, if you do this training, that I have never had the experience. Maybe that somebody's given a little bit too harsh for the level of learner, but just taking that time, I think we do an hour and a half feedback training exercises, but taking that time to make sure that it's embedded in them, to give them even parameters. We use an emotion wheel now. That even gave it more narrow of a thing where we could expand on what the emotions and feelings were, but you could only go so far, right?
We weren't using words like attacked or violated or, you know, these really harsh words that can be taken.
And for the most part, most people that want to be SPs want to help these healthcare providers, as long as they're understanding what their role is. Eventually, I mean, we've heard of a few cases where it can go off the rails. So I'm not trying to, you know, say that that's not going to happen, but as long as you're really watching for it and making sure that you're training for it, you're going to get the outcomes that you're hoping for.
And I think reiterate, like one thing that I know I always focused on when I would do feedback training was just, I would reiterate how vulnerable the students are in this scenario. That like
absolutely.
You are literally like
they're fragile.
You can give them feedback that they will remember 20 years later. Like you can say something to them that it can cut them like a knife. You know, so I would just reiterate the power that they had and how important it was. Not that we're not going to say something, like not that we're not going to tell them things that they can improve on, because our goal is we want to make them better healthcare providers. We want them to see something that they may not be able to see, or the mirror that's reflecting it back, right? But we hold a lot of power. So we're not going to be reckless with the power that we hold. And I think that being able to make sure that was really clear and understood also set the appropriate culture of what we are trying to do. We're not trying to, again, find every critique. We're not trying to tear them down. We're not trying to make them feel bad about themselves, but we are trying to give them constructive feedback. And I love how you used to always say it too. You'd always say that like, we're making a sculpture, and we're not going to just start hacking away at the middle, but we're going to start trimming off a side, and we're going to start smoothing out an edge, and we're going to really look at how we can make this. And I always saw that as a very uplifting way of looking at it, where it's like, no, we're making something beautiful, not tearing something down or not taking something away. And I think that that is the mindset that any person going into a feedback session, even debriefing, honestly, needs to go in with that same concept. We are sculpting young healthcare providers.
Formative simulation.
We are forming future healthcare providers. We are not trying to tear them down. We're not trying to destroy, like, you know, all of these things. We're using it to make something beautiful. And I think that when we can all be cognizant of that, and again, kind of that like same team mentality, it really helps your standardized patients really understand, like, no, this is your role. And this is what you're limited to. This is where you sit, and this is where you.
And I will say, just like humans by nature, we are trained to pick up on the negative.
Yeah.
That's our brains are wired that way, right? And so the other piece of this is making sure that you're picking up on the positive.
Yeah.
Because again, you want to tell students what to keep in their practice. You want to help form, not just don't do this, or, you know, again, that's not how you do the feedback, but, you know, work on this or whatever, but that it is the idea that these things really impacted the patient for the positive.
Yeah.
Because when they can begin to understand that, and they can begin to practice, like, even just acknowledgement and validation, it makes all the difference in the world for them, for that confidence when they're getting into their actual clinical practice.
Yeah. And I think that from the standardized patient side of it, it also then requires you to try to formulate why you felt connected to somebody or why you trusted somebody. Like, it's so funny. I can still have this one nursing student is still in my brain. I remember walking away from a maternity simulation with her. I still remember where I was like, she could be my doctor any day. Like, literally, my nurse. But like, either way, she could be my healthcare provider any day. I remember saying, you can deliver my baby any day. But it was like, she was so confident in all these things. But like, you take that in terms of like, you have this general feeling, but it's like, when you have to do your feedback, now it's breaking it down. Why did you feel that way? And why did you feel that? Yeah. What was it that made you trust that provider? And I think that that also requires more thought, right? Than just kind of like off the cuff of like how you feel. It's like, no, really, why? And then that makes you also think about what makes it so that you can trust a healthcare provider, and what makes it so that you feel, you know, that they've got your best interest or whatever it may be. But that feedback also makes you break it down in further levels.
Yeah. For sure.
All right. And so then the last piece in terms of essentials is professionalism. So anytime you have standardized patients, this is what we hear about all the time in terms of consulting, is that people are like, well, they didn't show up and they didn't do this and they went off the rails and I didn't know what to do. And then they stop and they don't continue on, or they get nervous about what that could potentially be of handing some of this power of simulation into somebody else's hands. And I always want to kind of flip it and be like, okay, well, what expectations were set? What was communicated to the patient or the standardized patient when you guys were getting started? What did the onboarding process look like? What did your interview process look like? And when it's kind of like, well, I just texted them that they need to show up this day and this time, and I didn't do training, and I just sent them the scenario. It's kind of like, well, it sounds like you didn't put a lot of time and attention into their training. So then why were you in return expecting a really professional SP who was going to like be prepared, be on it, be what you wanted them to be, when they really didn't get that onboarding process? So I think a lot of the professionalism goes into expectations of the role. And we did shift our culture strongly where we were with our SP program, where in the beginning, a lot of it was, thank you so much for making the time to be here. Thank you so much for just participating and doing the bare minimum, honestly, was what we were thanking them for. And when we shift it to be more of like, no, this is a really cool course and this is really fun. And basically this is an elite group that you get welcomed into.
It's a community.
And in a community, when you can perform and maintain and live up to the expectations of what you've agreed upon, that's where, again, you start to get that cultural shift where you do have people who are showing up on time. You do, like, again, if they are going to be late, they're letting you know by how much, when they're going to be there. If they can't make it, you have ample time to correct it. But you start to instill a sense of, this is the expectation, this is the bar I'm expecting you to be at, and you need to rise to meet that. And if you can't, then there's a different level of conversation, opposed to us lowering the bar for whoever is willing to come and participate.
Yeah, but I'll say this. That bar started in the interview.
Yeah.
Because that's when we really started to say, this course is not just, you don't even have to show up. You can just get notes and take the 3 exams. Yeah. This is a different course. You have to be here.
Yeah.
And so instilling that in them from the beginning so that if they were to say yes, if they were going to choose to sign up for this course, these are the expectations. Yeah. It set that tone from the beginning.
Yeah.
It was carried into class. I think my theater partner was really good. Before COVID, it was like, when can you not show up for a play? Mm-hmm. And the answer was, if you're dead. Yeah. And obviously COVID changed that a bit. Yeah. But it was the whole idea of professionalism and the fact that other people were counting on them and that the show must go on, right? Yeah. Especially when we were doing interprofessional sims where we had multiple faculty, multiple students. Yeah. It was so important that we had that, that we really ended up getting the quality of the students. And I will say, I have not had this corroborated by anybody else because I don't think there's a lot of people that have taught a course the way that we did. But I think SPs care very much about their GPA. Mm-hmm. Probably more so than getting paid a paycheck, right? Again, I'm not going to argue that with an SP. I can't say that that's true or it's not true. But I will say that there was a lot of attention paid to who we brought in the class, who we got to recruit for us to get the next group in. So again, making sure that your SPs understand the level of commitment that you need, and that you need, if there is a problem, if there is some type of concern, you need 24 hours notice. So if they even anticipate that there could be an issue, you need to know up front.
Yeah. We also set the expectation of, you're there 15 minutes early to get ready. I don't want you walking in at the last minute and throwing your book bag down and running in. You need time to prepare and get into the headspace of being the character. There is a consideration for, again, when you came to training, what was the expectation for that? And the other thing that I really liked that we started doing a little bit later into it was we started having them sign off on their hours during the dress rehearsal. And the best part of that for me was, as someone who was doing all of the scheduling, was that if there was an issue, I have a doctor's appointment that day, I didn't realize I forgot to put it on my calendar. Well, I have everybody else who's trained to be that role there at that time. Okay, who can swap? Who can take so-and-so's Tuesday at 3? Okay, great. You guys are going to swap here. Okay, I'll make that official on your guys' calendar once we leave here. But rather than me having to send out emails and follow up and all of these other things, okay, let's handle it here, and we would get it finalized. Right. And then when they would sign their name next to it, a no-show was, you knew. There was no question if you signed off on it. You knew this. So there was also a different level of expectation there in terms of checking. But I think that in addition to the not only being late or the showing up and things like that, there's also how seriously are you taking the scenario and then the feedback process. And again, we really never had a whole lot of issues in our years because I think we had a very strong culture of that where there was a high expectation of what that was going to look like. And it was enforced. I mean, again, there was no you weren't able to go into that scenario and do anything other than be professional without it. It was going to get called out if it was anything other than that. And I think that level of professionalism throughout the program led the bar to continue to be high because there was something that was going to be addressed by that. But making sure that not only is it you're on time, you're present, you're prepared, but you are also going into that and you understand that there's a level of professionalism that's going to be maintained inside of the simulation and the debriefing process. And if not, it's going to be addressed. And I will say this, as I've been quoted before, but you can you could not make a good actor professional, but you can take a professional person and you can make them a good actor. And at the end of the day, I will take the person who is professional, who wants to try, who's there, and I will grow them in terms of what they can be for their performance level. But if a performer is fantastic, but they don't show up on time, they don't take the process seriously, and I can't get them there, it doesn't benefit me then. You're a great performer, but if I can't get you in sim.
Or you can't even count on them.
Yeah, if I can't get you in the bed. Maybe they show up
a couple times, but then, so yeah. And I think that the big thing is that we did learn over the time. So our dress rehearsals were either a week, minimum of 3 days before the first performance. Yeah. So it did give us time to maybe potentially address that.
So one thing we haven't really gone into a whole lot in terms of standardized patient is just talking about the psychological safety. That is a whole nother key part here.
And we have a whole another podcast on
Yeah,
that.
there's a whole nother podcast episode specifically going over the psychological safety of students, the standardized patient, and everyone involved. So know that that is a factor in here, but in terms of training, again, we just kind of wanted to keep this, in these 3 essentials opposed to going into the psychological safety. So thank you guys for joining us today. Again, if you have anything else that you want to add in or any specific questions about working with standardized patients or inside a human simulation, let us know. We'd love to hear what they are.
And we'd love to talk about it.
Yeah. See you guys next time.